We are continuing with our introductory to basic concepts of Kabbalah. And by the way, today is the Israeli Memorial Day for the soldiers and all those who died in acts of terrorism and violence. So, Yeh Zechram Baruch. When we're talking about Kabbalah, we're talking about main concept. And one of the main concepts of Kabbalistic philosophy, or of Kabbalah itself, is the concept of Ratzon. Ratzon means a will. So it has a significant, a very deep meaning in Kabbalah itself, that concept of Ratzon, or will. And I'm going to use, from now on, I'm going to use Ratzon versus the will. And it has a much broader meaning to what we know of what we refer to as will, Ratzon. I want to, I don't want to. It's much more than that. And let's use, or try to use an analogy that maybe will help us to understand this better. Let's say, for example, you're about to buy a house, right? And you're about to buy a house, so it's in the last stages of construction. And of course, before that stage that we were at, there were other stages. There was the stage of planning, and before that, we had the stage of thinking of building. In other words, determining the purposes that we are trying to achieve here. In other words, is this building that we're building, is this going to be residential? Is it going to be commercial? And even before the stages of planning, there was another stage, and there was the willingness to build that structure. Okay, so if we're going to make an order in the stages that brought us to the actual building of that structure, so therefore the first stage was the willingness to build the building. The second stage was the stage of thinking how to build it. In other words, collecting all the data on all the possible, all the possibilities that are there, all the data necessary, whether the soil could hold this kind of building, whether it's zoning, whether it's not zoning, and on and on and on and on. And then the third stage is the execution. And the execution is the stage that transforms us from what we call from a koach el poal, from a planning to actual execution, to doing it. And in the stages of ratzon, of will, we have the machshava of building, the thought about building. That building did not really exist. It was just bekoach, in the potential. And in execution, what we call shlav habitzua, in execution, the building transforms itself from to an actual reality. Now we have to actually have a building. So if we're going to look around us, all around us, we would see that our reality and all its components of our reality had to go through this process. When a person is building a house or factory or whatever it is, or plowing a road or making a new road, or anything that you do, even if it's simple, like writing a letter, if you write a letter, or making dinner, and so on and so forth. And all of this action, there is an order. The order has to be present in all the actions. And it is almost like a certain rule of nature that we have to, it's a gradual move or transformation between the stages. And there's going to be the ratzon for the action, the willingness to act, the thought, which include with it all the necessary details of the actions and its purposes, and then it's the execution itself. In other words, actually doing it, as they say. So if you think that there is any way in nature, any way in the world, as they say, that you could skip those, you're wrong. This is never going to happen. So the question could be asked for example, if you ask yourself, if a person is doing a certain action, could we determine, or we could conclude a conclusion regarding the ability of that particular person. For example, if I have an engineer that build a small bridge, a narrow and small bridge, could we conclude from that 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 engineer cannot build a large scale bridge, a bigger bridge? Let's say, for example, I have a small bridge over Union Turnpike. So let's say the engineer that designed the bridge or supervises building, is he limited to this kind of bridge only, or he can also in theory build also, let's say, the Verrazano Bridge or George Washington Bridge? Can I conclude anything to his abilities about it? Right? The answer is, of course, we can't. I cannot conclude that something like this is not happening. It's just that he needed to build a small bridge now, and if he needs a bigger bridge, he could do it. We cannot learn anything about the person who or the individual who designed or build it to his ability based on what he did. That you can't do that. It's just that. So if you ask me, so why didn't he build a bigger bridge? Because he didn't need to. Based on what this bridge needed to achieve, there's no need for a big bridge. Let's say, for example, I have a bridge to go over Union Turnpike. It will be absolutely an overkill to build, let's say, a George Washington Bridge over it, because I don't need it. I need a small bridge. So the execution of the bridge came according to a thought that has to do based on the needs. Now, since the meaning of will, of ratzon, is achieving a certain and specific purpose, right? There is no human will that is essence is going to be something that we could actually achieve, or we could determine, or we could control, because that willingness, that ratzon that we actually want, is what limits, or our ability is what limits the ratzon. In other words, if I want to be able to jump from here to the moon, my abilities are not going to be able to do so. So therefore, mimele, I don't have any will to do something that is not within my ability. And in our case, if let's say the engineer wanted to build a small bridge, the only reason was because the purpose of building the bridge, that's what determined his ability to build the bridge, not his own abilities to build any kind of a bridge. So I cannot assume the limitation or the abilities of the engineer based on the final product whatsoever. Okay, so that has to be understood. So if we're going to try to summarize it, is going to be A, from the actions of the person, we could learn about his will, from what he did, or about his will. B, from the actions of a person, we could not learn on the overall abilities of this particular person or this particular individual, because it's limited by circumstances. And C is that the target or the purpose in which, let's say, the person, or to our case that we said before was an engineer, wanted to achieve by this particular answer, is what limits his will and therefore limits his action. And if you pay attention to what we just said today now, and you're actually going to contemplate it, you'll be able to achieve unbelievable things. And most of the time that we says, oh, the reason what I failed is because this wasn't in place, and this wasn't in place, and this wasn't in place. And if you remember, many times I told you, the reason why you're not able to achieve, to become great, is not because of your abilities, it's rather because you didn't want to. And how many times have I said to you, the reason why you are not huge Talmidei Chachamim is not because you can't, it's because you really don't want to. Because Chazal told us, Ein davar ha'omed bifnei haratzon. Nothing can stand in the way of your will. But if you want to, But regardless of your abilities, you could be, for example, a person with tremendous physical abilities. You could run a 40-yard dash, like doing football at 3.5 seconds. And if you don't want to, you can't run. I saw this guy the other day. It was 360 pounds. 360 pounds. He runs the 40 dash at under 5 seconds because he worked very, very hard. But you're gonna tell me, when, if you want to be an Olympic gold medalist in a 100-meter dash, could you? I would say to you, right now, I can't. And why is that? Because that window of opportunity was closed. Even with all your will and so on and so forth, since we are confined by the dimension of time, you have to understand that there are certain limitations that would be limited that you can't do. For example, if a person is on his deathbed and now he wants to get a PhD in philosophy, you can't. You're limited by time. And that's why the thing is that we need to understand that nothing could ever stay the same the way it is. Nothing. Even if I will be able to go in and put time on pause, since you are moving, you are not paused. Just time around you, the environment around you is on pause. You are still moving. Even for you, things are dynamic. They're never going to stay the same. So you are limited within time. But once the authority, or you are still okay with the structure or with the cube of time, anything that you want to achieve could be achieved if you want to. If you want to. So that's why you understand how important the ratzon, the will, is in Judaism and in Kabbalah altogether. And you could not assume, for example, by the fact that there is, the Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world or created the universe, that you cannot learn something of the abilities of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. This world, therefore, was created for a certain reason with its own limitation, for a purpose, but you could not determine or conclude anything about a Kadosh Baruch Hu and his abilities by looking at this world. That's one thing. Another thing is that in order to achieve and succeed in this world, you need to have ratzon, will, you need to have machshava, thought, and gathering all the information and so on and so forth, and you need to be able to execute it. This is the trifecta of achievement in this world according to Kabbalah. Ratzon, machshava, maaseh. Have a great day.